You may be seated. I invite you to pick up the larger book again, the Eitz Chaim, to page 483. Page 483. These are the words that Maddie just finished chanting in Hebrew, and they are filled with moral outrage. As I set up the Haftorah that Maddie chanted, there was a law from our Torah reading, from Mishpatim, saying that a robber who had engaged in this theft during the day and was caught and couldn't repay, that person would have to indemnify for that theft and be a slave. But even that person in the 7th year was to be released. But that wasn't happening, except for that short period of time when the siege seemed to be lifted. And now, as the slaves were taken back by force by their more powerful masters, listen to Jeremiah, verse 17, 483. Assuredly, thus said the Lord, you would not obey me and proclaim a release, each to his kinsmen and countrymen. Lo, I proclaim your release, declares the Lord, to the sword, to pestilence, and to famine, and I will make you a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. I will make the men who violated my covenant, who did not fulfill the terms of the covenant which they made before me, like the calf which they cut in two, so as to pass between the halves. The officers of Judah and Jerusalem, the officials, the priests, and all the people of the land who passed between the halves of the calf shall be handed over to their enemies, to those who seek to kill them. Their carcasses shall become food for the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. I will hand over King Tzidkiah of Judah and his officers to their enemies who seek to kill them, to the army of the king of Babylon who is withdrawn from you. Imagine that kind of rage on Sunday morning TV news shows. That's politics. In that, the king, ruling a people, has had an agreement to fulfill a moral duty commanded in our Torah reading that they have reneged on. I reread this when I sat with Maddie in preparing for her teaching today. And what struck me in reading the Haftorah, which sometimes I don't read so carefully, was the extreme nature of the prophet's words. And not just the language, but the emotion behind it. And indeed, what will happen historically is that the Babylonians will conquer the land and there will be a sword against the people of the land. I'm reading a remarkable book that I want to bring to your attention by Yuval Harari. He is a history professor at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His first book, History of Homo Sapiens, was an international bestseller, as was his second. Somebody in our community looked into bringing him to speak in our community after only 2 books. And he said he would come to Orange County, but his speaking fee is $200,000 a speech, not unlike some of those past presidents. Bottom line, his most current book that I'm now reading is called 21... I'm now forgetting the second word. It'll come. 21 lessons, that's it, 21 lessons for the 21st century. And he points out something quite remarkable. He talks about how there's never been a time in human history in which there's been greater consensus in many, many ways, including economics. He points out that when ISIS, in its radical Sunni Islamic conquest of Iraq, Babylonia, was killing people over religious ideals, so Christians were killed en masse by these religious fanatics. All the people who didn't agree with them, even their places of worship were destroyed. But when they got to the bank, they found all this paper that had English on it and pictures of presidents of the United States. Now, you might think for ideological reasons that too would be forbidden, that too would have been burnt. But those dollar bills were kept. Because what they shared in this world in which we live is a sense that money matters, and that on some level that is outside of ideology, even outside, if you will, of the purity of spirit that they fought for. One last image. Last Saturday night, I watched a show, which is a documentary on Netflix that I would bring to your attention. It was recommended to me by a person who has a very different political persuasion than I do. He found this film remarkable, and he had watched it months ago. It wasn't a new film, but it was relevant because it's a film called Get Me Roger Stone. Roger Stone, last week, was indicted for misdeeds. This particular documentary came out before the indictment by a lot. And among the lessons that Roger Stone teaches and how he does business as a political consultant is if you're ever accused of doing something illegal or wrong, deny, deny, deny. Something he said he learned from Roy Cohn, who was the lawyer in the McCarthy hearings. I wrote to my friend that I had just watched the documentary. It was like midnight, Saturday night. And I said I was really disturbed by it. To which he replied, he's a political genius. To which I responded, he's very talented and immoral. And then I added, and what would Jeremiah say? Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, morality matters, and so does outrage by immorality. People may differ on how they weigh political values. There's a place for debate of how best to meet the needs of our country. But lying is wrong. Dirty tricks are wrong. Failing to see the humanity of others is wrong. What would